When we moved from Salinas to the Denver area, I thought I understood storms. Having lived in Florida, I was used to the warm afternoon rains that came and went like clockwork. But Colorado's storms were different, wild, untamed, and almost sentient in their fury. From late spring to early fall, they arrived without fail. Cold air from Canada collided with warm air from Mexico, and the Rocky Mountains seemed to summon the chaos overhead. The sky would darken, swallowing the mountains in rolling clouds. Then came the thunder, the lightning, and sometimes hail the size of golf balls. Jasper, our fluffy American Eskimo, despised those storms. Normally, he was fearless and stubborn, refusing to let anyone near him with a brush. But when the sky rumbled, he became a quivering shadow at my feet. One stormy afternoon, I discovered that brushing him calmed him. His growl softened, and he sat still, letting me work through the tangles in his thick coat. It became a ritual, Jasper trembling under the table, my hand moving methodically through his fur as the windows rattled with every clap of thunder. Then came the night that changed everything. The storm rolled in as usual, dark clouds, restless wind. I had just finished work and stood on the back porch, watching the trees bow under the force of the gusts. Jasper pawed at my leg anxiously. The first lightning bolt struck somewhere close, bathing the yard in stark white. The deafening crack sent Jasper scurrying inside. I lingered a moment longer, transfixed by the storm's power. That's when I saw it, across the field behind our house. A figure stood. At first, I mistook it for a tree, but when the lightning flashed again, the shape became disturbingly clear. It was too tall, too thin, its head tilting slightly as if observing me. A chill that had nothing to do with the wind crawled down my spine. Slowly, I backed into the house, locking the door behind me. "Jasper?" I called, but he was already under the table, whimpering. I tried to shake the unease, focusing on brushing Jasper, letting the repetitive motion soothe both of us. Then, the power cut out. The house was plunged into darkness, save for the occasional illumination from the storm outside. I lit a few candles, my heart pounding. The figure was gone. Relief flooded me until the knock came, soft at first, barely audible over the storm. Then again, louder, from the back door. Jasper growled, a deep, guttural sound I had never heard from him before. I swallowed hard. "Hello?" My voice wavered. No answer. Grabbing a kitchen knife, I edged toward the back door. The porch light was out, but lightning revealed the empty yard in fractured flashes. No one was there. Then came another knock, this time from the front door. The storm raged outside, wind howling, windows shuddering. Jasper barked wildly, his gaze fixed on the living room window. I followed his stare and felt my stomach drop. The figure was back, closer now. The lightning made its outline sharper, revealing spindly arms and a face utterly devoid of features. It didn't move, but I could feel it watching. "Get out!" I shouted, yanking the blinds shut. Panic took over. I locked every door and window, my hands shaking. The figure never advanced, but its presence was suffocating, pressing against the walls like the storm itself. Minutes dragged into eternity. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the storm softened. The thunder grew distant. The wind calmed. I dared to look outside. The figure was gone. Relief was fleeting. When I turned back, my breath caught in my throat. Muddy footprints stretched across the floor, from the back door to the table where Jasper cowered. The door was still locked. Something had been inside. Gripping the knife, I gathered Jasper and barricaded us in the bedroom. Every creak of the house made my pulse race. I stayed awake, waiting for the first light of dawn to chase the terror away. By morning, there was no sign of forced entry. No broken locks. No open windows. The footprints had dried, leaving no trace but the dread in my chest. I cleaned them, convincing myself it had been a nightmare. But it wasn't the storm that frightened Jasper that night. To this day, I don't stand outside during thunderstorms. Whenever the sky darkens and the wind picks up, I make sure every door is locked. The figure hasn't returned. Yet. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, coating the streets in a glistening sheen. From a window of the old diner, I watched the occasional car pass by, headlights reflecting off the slick pavement. The clock above the counter read 11 p.m. I had been there for hours, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, waiting. Then I saw him, a lone driver heading home after a long shift, his car crawling cautiously through the dimly lit streets. His shoulders were heavy with exhaustion, eyes blinking more than they should have been. He was unaware, unprepared for what was about to unfold. Lightning tore through the sky without warning, striking a transformer just ahead of him. The explosion lit up the night in a violent burst of energy, sending sparks raining down like molten fire. His car screeched to a halt, the tires skidding slightly against the wet road. For a moment, everything stood still, except for him. I could see the shock ripple through his body as he gripped the steering wheel, his chest rising and falling in rapid succession. Yet something was missing. No thunder followed the strike. No distant rumble echoed through the streets. Just silence, thick and unnatural. I watched as he hesitated, then continued driving, his senses on high alert. He must have felt it, that shift in the air, the way the world suddenly seemed different. He wasn't alone in sensing it. As he approached, I stepped out from the shadows, the brim of my hat shielding my face from the drizzle. I stood motionless, waiting. The street lamp flickered above me, casting my silhouette onto the pavement. His headlights swept over me, and I could see the exact moment his stomach twisted in unease. His grip on the wheel tightened. His breathing shallowed. Good. He drove past, but not before I turned my head slightly, just enough for him to notice. He glanced back in the rearview mirror, and I knew he felt it, the heavy, suffocating sense of being watched. His pace quickened, tires splashing through puddles as he put distance between us. Distance meant nothing. By the time he reached his quiet neighborhood, I was already there, standing at the end of the street, waiting. His porch light flickered to life as he parked. The hesitation was clear. He stared at me, eyes wide with disbelief. He had been driving. I had been on foot. Yet there I stood, unmoving. Panic set in. He rushed inside, locked the door, and retreated into the false safety of his home. But I knew he was still watching, peering through the curtains, hoping, praying that I had vanished. I hadn't. The house fell silent, save for the ticking of a clock and the faint tapping of rain against the glass. I listened as he moved inside, his breath coming in quick, uneven bursts. He was afraid now. Perfect. Then he heard it. A creak, subtle yet deliberate. His body stiffened at the sound. His instincts screamed at him, told him to run, to hide. But he did neither. He hesitated, and I watched. He climbed the stairs, one shaky step at a time. But I was already there, lingering just beyond his window. The fear in his eyes when he saw my shadow move across the glass was exquisite. He dropped to the floor, clutching his phone like a lifeline. "There's someone outside my house," he whispered into the receiver, voice barely steady. The police arrived quickly. Their flashing lights bathed the house in red and blue, their voices cutting through the night. I stood at the edge of his yard, drenched but undisturbed. They shouted. I did not move. Only when they commanded it again did I raise my hands. Slowly, deliberately. Compliance was easy. I had already accomplished what I set out to do. As they cuffed me, I turned my head slightly, just enough to meet his gaze, and I smiled. Later, they told him I had nothing on me, no weapons, no tools, nothing to suggest malice. But I didn't need any of those things. I had already gotten inside his head, nestled deep into the place where fear lives, and that was enough. In 2004, not long after moving to Florida, I experienced one of the most terrifying nights of my life. Hurricane Charlie was on its way, and the news was filled with dire warnings. My wife had left a day early to stay with her family up north, but I chose to stay behind and protect the house. At the time, I had no idea how unnerving it would be to face a storm like that alone. The days leading up to the hurricane were chaotic. News reports showed frantic shoppers clearing store shelves of essentials like water, batteries, and plywood. By the time I went to stock up, there wasn't much left. I managed to grab some candles, a couple of flashlights, and a few cans of food. As for plywood, forget it. It had been gone within hours. With no way to properly bore up my windows, I did what I could, taping them and hoping it would hold. That night, the storm arrived in full force. The wind howled, bending trees like they were made of rubber. Rain lashed against the windows, drumming relentlessly. Thunder rolled across the sky, each rumble louder than the last. Then, around 8 p.m., the power went out, plunging me into darkness. Only the flickering candlelight pushed back the shadows. At first, I wasn't scared. Florida gets storms all the time, right? But as the night wore on, something changed. The wind's howl took on an almost human quality, like distant wailing. Every creak of the house felt amplified, each noise sending a shiver down my spine. And then I heard it, a faint noise, barely audible over the storm. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it came again, a low, moaning sound like someone in pain. It didn't sound like anything natural. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, straining to hear over the storm. The sound came again, louder this time, and it was coming from inside the house. Gripping my flashlight, I swept its beam across the room. Shadows danced on the walls, but everything looked normal. My rational mind told me it was just my imagination, amplified by the storm and isolation. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then, a loud thump from upstairs. I nearly dropped the flashlight. My throat went dry, and my pulse thundered in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, but I couldn't ignore it. I had to know. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed, each step feeling heavier than the last. At the top, I hesitated, shining my flashlight down the hallway. The guest room door was ajar, swaying slightly, as if someone had just passed through it. My stomach churned. I was sure I had closed all the doors before the storm hit. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The room was empty, nothing out of place, nothing to explain the sound. I checked the closet, under the bed, nothing. My shoulders sagged with relief, until I turned to leave. The sound came again. This time it was right behind me. I whipped around, flashlight shaking in my grip. The beam illuminated the corner of the room. Nothing, just an empty space and the steady drip of water from a leak in the ceiling. I bolted downstairs, my heart pounding. Back in the living room, I clutched the flashlight like a lifeline. The storm still raged, but inside the house, an eerie silence had settled. Too silent. Even the usual creaks and groans of the house were gone. I sat on the couch, every muscle tensed, trying to rationalize what had happened. Then a sudden bang. It echoed through the house, like the front door slamming shut. I leapt to my feet, flashlight beam darting wildly. Rushing to the door, I found it still locked, the deadbolt firmly in place. No one could have come in, and yet the sound had been unmistakable. Opening the door, I shone my light outside. The porch was empty. The storm howled on undisturbed. I shut the door and leaned against it, breath coming in shallow gasps. Then I noticed it. Wet footprints. They trailed from the front door into the house. My legs felt like lead as I followed them into the living room. And then they stopped. Just stopped. No sign of anyone. No trail leading away. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear and confusion. The strange noises ceased, but the oppressive feeling of being watched never left. I sat on the couch, gripping the flashlight, waiting for dawn. When the storm finally passed, I searched the house from top to bottom. No sign of an intruder. No explanation for the noises or the footprints. To this day, I have no idea what happened that night.